All right, guys. So there's an CIA advisor out there trying to sell a book that is essentially telling people that the U.S. is on course for a civil war, right? We're closer to a civil war than any of us would like to believe, she says. Now, again, keep in mind, this is an advisor to the CIA, okay? So when I hear something like that, and I think about the CIA, and how, the CIA, they kind of specialize in civil wars, right? Specifically orchestrating them to overthrow democracies, right? Like we've been doing in South America and Southeast Asia and the Middle East for a long time. But, I'm just saying, right? When I hear CIA advisor and they say something like that, my ears poke up and I gotta listen, just considering what we all should know about the CIA and their shenanigans overseas, right? However, I gotta say this. I take this with a grain of salt. And the reason why is because she references this concept of democracy eroding away in the United States. And that has been a talking point that left-wing liberal media has been pushing, that is really code for stop Trump from winning in 2024, right? That's what it's really code for. Let's keep talking about January 6th and stop Trump from winning in 2024. No matter what, right? So I take the things that she's actually saying with a grain of salt, but regardless, I think it is fun and worthwhile to have a discussion about her theories and the things that she's saying, even though I think a lot of it is kind of BS and it's just propaganda. So without further ado, she actually did an interview on CNN, and I hate to show this CNN clip, but that keeps me from reading to you guys, of her discussing her book and her hypothesis here. So let's watch the clip and then I'll give you guys my opinion.
According to a Washington Post editorial, data from the Center for Systemic Peace finds the US no longer technically qualifies as a democracy after the Trump administration years. It's somewhere between a democracy and an autocratic state. Barbara Walter is a professor of international relations at the School of Global Policy and Strategy at the University of California, San Diego. She joins me now, and I'm delighted. I mean, when we look at the research, it's frankly frightening, and you conclude that the US is, quote, closer to civil war than any of us would like to believe. How close?
Well, I've been studying civil wars for the last 30 years across the globe. And in fact, the last 4 years, I've been on a task force run by the CIA that tries to predict where outside the United States a civil war, political violence, and instability is likely to break out. And we actually know now that the two best predictors of whether violence is likely to happen are whether a country is an anocracy, and that's a fancy term for a partial democracy, and whether ethnic entrepreneurs have emerged in a country that are using racial, religious, or ethnic divisions to try to gain political power. And the amazing thing about the United States is that both of these factors currently exist, and they have emerged at a surprisingly fast rate.
What's remarkable is the research isn't based on sentiment. It's based on metrics and markers and signs and facts that the US uses to determine the state of other countries' democracies and proximity to upheaval. So if the US were looking at another country and saw these signs, what would be the US evaluation of that country?
The US would look at that country and we would put that country likely at risk, we quote unquote, risk of civil war. The United States is pretty close to being at high risk of civil war. And once a country is at high risk, the task force puts it on what we call a watch list. Countries that the agency wants to watch very closely because they believe sometime in the next few years, that country is at high risk of descending into instability or political violence.
Wow. I think most Americans automatically assume, truly believe that democracy is sacrosanct in this country, that the system is solid and safe and impervious. What do you say to them? How do you punch through complacency?
What I say to them is we all wish that the United States was a strong democracy. We all see it that way, but the reality is just not true. The United States has been declining as a democracy for the last 5 years on every measure. There are multiple different data sets that measure democracy in various different ways, and all of them have showed America in decline. And in fact, the main measure that the task force uses to predict political violence, it comes from a data set called the Polity data set. They have actually classified the United States for the very first time as an anocracy, not a full democracy, not a partial democracy. Some people call it a hybrid democracy. Fareed Zakaria has called it an illiberal democracy, but it is certainly not considered on par with countries like Switzerland or Canada or Denmark or Japan. We are no longer considered the world's longest democracy. That ended in January of 2021.
It ended in January 2021. Really? Really? Right? What do you guys think that's in reference to? January 6th? Probably. Again, and this is why I say a lot of this stuff I only can take with a grain of salt, because it is really just propaganda to continue to talk about January 6th, right? And basically try to stop Trump from winning in 2024. That's really what it is. Okay, and Miss Barbara Walter here, who claims to be a political scientist, a professor at a university, she acts as if the U.S. has been a full democracy before Trump, and the U.S. has never been a full democracy, okay? We've never been a full democracy, right? We have a representative democracy, right? We have a republic, okay? A constitutional republic. People love to use all types of fancy words, but essentially what it just means is that we use elements of democracy in order to elect representatives to then carry out the will of the people. That's how you sum it up, right? And that's a good thing, right? That's actually how we maintain stability versus some of these other countries that have used full democracy and they let the radicals overthrow their country. You would think that a so-called political scientist will understand that. In my opinion, the way our system is built actually helps us stay stable. Now, is there some things that we can change about the way we elect our leaders that will probably make us less polarized? Sure. Right? But I don't think that that's necessarily a threat to democracy. Okay? However, I'm not saying that we could not be closer to civil war than we think. Now, guys, I'm an optimist, right? I tend to be an optimist, okay? And I tend to think that based off my lived experience and me going out and interacting with normal people, I don't think people are necessarily at each other's throats, okay? Not the way it's portrayed in the media and on the internet, right? I tend to want to believe that people don't go outside in the real world and they just hate each other because of their skin color, their race, their gender, whatever, right? At least in my personal experience. I don't know where you guys live, right? Maybe some parts of the country, people are experiencing that. I'm personally not experiencing that. I think a lot of this stuff is just perceived because of what we see on the internet and on TV, right? However, I could be wrong, right? There could be underlying tensions that could possibly lead to some type of civil war or conflict, right? It most certainly could happen. And the reasons why it could happen and the evidence for that is actually from more left-wing movements and left-wing policies that are going on in this country that I think could lead us there, right? Contrary to what this professor and everybody in the mainstream liberal media is citing, which is basically Trump, right? Which is why I think a whole lot of this stuff is propaganda. At the end of the day, they want to talk about January 6th all day, right? But they don't really want to talk about the violence that happened for months before January 6th, before the election occurred, in which you had left-wing radicals burning down and tearing up cities in the name of social justice, right? They never mentioned that as a threat to democracy when that is just flat out political violence, right? That is the most political violence we've seen in this country in a long, long, long time, okay? What happened on January 6th is literally nothing compared to what has happened all last year in terms of lives lost, damage, impact on society as a whole. It's not even comparable, really, to be quite honest with you. It's just not. If we keeping it a whole 100. Now, January 6th was still bad. I still think that it was probably one of the worst days for the conservative movement that I can think of in a long, long, long time. It was not a good look for the conservative movement and the Republican Party. It just wasn't, right? It was a disastrous day for that. It accomplished nothing. It was wrong. Okay, it was wrong. But it gets way too much attention from the mainstream liberal media versus what happened last year, which again, in my opinion, was much worse and had a much larger impact. Again, both are bad. But again, I'm just so annoyed by the fact that people are literally only talking about this one isolated event instead of talking about a whole bunch of events that happened last year that we still have not really came to terms with. And honestly, in my opinion, those protests and riots that happened all last year was a pretext to January 6th. It was a precursor. And the reason why is because it established the precedent, because the Democrats were cool with it, that, hey, you know what? It's okay to use violence to achieve political goals, right? And because that was done all last year and Democrats low-key endorsed it, I think, again, that kind of paved the way for something like January 6th to happen. So, again, they want to talk about January 6th all day, but they don't want to go back to what led up to it, which, in my opinion, was these so-called social justice protests / riots, okay? That basically, again, made it okay to say, hey, you know what? Let's use political violence to achieve our goals, okay? When it should have been condemned from the get-go. If it was condemned and controlled from the get-go, where people said, no, this is not okay from the get-go, and you shut it down when it first started happening, I don't think January 6th would have happened. I don't think it would have happened at all, period. When we're talking about organized movements that have resulted in widespread damage across the country, just objectively speaking, this is an undisputable fact. 99% of that has come from left-wing associated movements, whether that be Black Lives Matter or Antifa. That's just a fact, okay? So when they go out here and they say this stuff, but they never mention that, I automatically, you're discredited in my head, right? I'm automatically listening to you, okay, you're propaganda. You're trying to sell your book. You're just pushing the whole January 6th thing because we got the January 6th whatever going on right now. And I don't even like talking about it because, again, I think it's silly. It's a witch hunt. It's something they want to keep going on and talking about forever because they don't want to talk about anything else. They don't want to focus on the failures of the Biden administration. So, yeah, I mean, if you're talking about left-wing political violence, I think that's definitely a symptom of, a country that could be on the verge of civil war. I mean, she talked about ethnic entrepreneurs emerging in the country using racial, religious, and ethnic divisions to try to gain political power. Who does that sound like, right? Does that sound like anybody on the right? That sounds like some left-wing movements to me. I'm just saying, about her own standards and definitions and her own risk factors, it sounds like you need to be paying attention to the left-wing movements. I'm just saying. Interestingly enough, there's more to this, as 3 retired military generals recently penned a joint op-ed in the Washington Post where they raised the alarm over their shared concern about, quote, the aftermath of the 2024 presidential election and the potential for lethal chaos inside our military following the turmoil last year. In short, we are chilled to our bones at the thought of a coup succeeding next time, the generals wrote. Okay, so again, we have the military here talking about how they're afraid of a coup, right? They're afraid of a coup succeeding. Okay, and again, I got questions about this because, again, in my mind, I'm thinking a whole lot of this stuff is propaganda. Okay, what are you trying to say? Are you trying to say in the next scenario, some people who don't have weapons are actually going to be able to overthrow the government? I just don't see how that happens. I don't see how they're going to be able to accomplish that, right? I don't think that's going to work. And the only thing else that they could possibly be talking about is an internal military coup or something like that, which that could be possible. I'm not going to lie, right? The political divisions in our country can be so deep that could possibly happen. But again, what they always really try to do is they try to specifically associate that with Trump. And again, I think that's, again, where the propaganda comes in my opinion. Now, some other things I think that could possibly lead to a civil conflict is some of these left-wing policies, right? Like these mandates, okay, that Biden's trying to impose at the federal level. Okay, if he was able to impose these mandates on, the whole country, I do think at that point, you would see some type of civil conflict, right? Because, again, a lot of people on the right are just kind of like, I just want to live my life. I just want to do my thing. I don't really want to bother anybody or harm anybody. I just want to do me, right? I just want the government to leave me alone. However, people on the left are like, no. You have to do what we tell you to do. And if you don't do what we tell you to do, then we're going to force it on you, right? We're going to arrest you, lock you up in a cage, and you won't see the light of day, okay? So, I mean, when you're talking about the threat of civil war, to me, in my opinion, I think the authoritarianism that is coming from the Biden administration, again, Trump didn't force that on people, right? The authoritarianism that's coming from the Biden administration trying to make people live in a way that they don't want to live, yeah, that's a threat. In my opinion, that is something that can make people rise up and to say, hey, you know what? We had enough of this, right? We don't want our rights taken away. Okay? But again, all this stuff is mainly associated with left-wing movements, right? Again, this is contrary to what's being pushed in the mainstream liberal media, which is trying to make it seem like everything is coming from the right. And I'm not saying there's no potential threats on the right. There's cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs people on both sides of the aisle, right? Obviously, cuckoo for Cocoa Puff people on both sides of the aisle. But again, in my opinion, the people on the right aren't really trying to push their way of life on other people, right? And I think when you're trying to push your way of life on other people, I think that's what really is the biggest threat in regards to a potential civil war. However, overall, I'm optimistic that this won't happen. And I'm optimistic that a lot of the divisions in this country are really just in the media, right? It's a perception that's given to us by the media and it's on social media, right? And on the internet, because people can say what they want on social media and the internet. However, I don't know if that is manifested itself in real life outside of some extreme factions on the right and some extreme factions on the left that are much more prevalent on the left, in my opinion. So regardless, again, I'm optimistic that this won't happen and that hopefully these political tensions will cool down as we move forward here into the future. But, you know, creating division in this country, especially for the mainstream liberal media, is profitable. So who knows if we will ever get back to a point where, you know, we're actually united again as a country. Maybe, maybe not. As long as the Democrats keep pushing their authoritarian agenda, I just don't see how we can get there. But hopefully, again, that doesn't lead us to civil war. Let me know what you guys think. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. Most importantly, share a Black conservative perspective. Peace.